everyone, JSTCool here, and welcome to another Skitty Man development video. Now, it's been a while since I've done one of these, because, I don't know, I've been doing other things, I guess. But that doesn't mean I've been completely silent on the game development front. I have, in fact, done a bunch of things. One of those things is documenting the heck out of this code base to make sure that, I don't know, people can actually read it. It is an open source project at the moment, so actually giving, comments on what's going on is probably a good thing. Not enough open source projects do this, so, taking charge, leading by example is one of those things. Another thing that I did recently, actually in a live stream, was I actually redid the way that blueprints copying and pasting blueprints into stages works. Instead of using a dedicated copy method that every item or every component would have to implement, it now uses the serial constructor system that I implemented in one of the previous updates for multiplayer. This simplifies the classes because we already basically have the tools to clone things. Another thing I did to hopefully try to improve the way multiplayer is working, or the reaction times of multiplayer, is I set this option on the sockets. I did this recently. I found out it's a thing. There's something called TCP no delay, which basically disables an efficient packing algorithm to make TCP packets send immediately, even if there's only like 1 byte of information that needs to be sent. Hopefully that speeds up connections, although I haven't been able to necessarily check, as I haven't had a wired-to-wired connection to see if that dropped the times, but that's hopefully a thing. And the final thing, which will hopefully be the subject of this video, is I've started work on the game's modular property system, which should make the stage components almost completely modular now, there being almost nothing hard-coded with them. Almost. There will still be some stuff, but it's coming a long way. But to explain what's going on, let's go into MS Paint so I can kind of describe it. Alright, so this is what the toolbox window currently looks like when you're editing the contents / properties of something that you can select. Now, obviously this is a specific example, as this is for sign contents. This will look different depending on what you're editing, but it's, functionally similar to this. The biggest and most important thing here is that all of this, what goes in this slot up here, is always hard-coded to the specific thing that you are editing. So signs have this hard-coded, logic buttons have something else hard-coded so you can select a variable, sound boxes, whatever. They're all hard-coded, which isn't good at all. So what I plan to do with the properties is make this whole system here modular. And the way we're doing that is with various properties. So we'll have string, integer, groups, variables, all these different things that the game currently supports, and probably some extra ones, will have various types of properties created for them. So the way that this is going to work is that each component, let's say represented by this blue box right here, is going to implement the configurable interface, represented by this little text here. The configurable interface will have exactly one method, which is getProperties. That will return a list of properties, represented here by this P in rectangles. Specifically, what a property is a property is just simply a way to get and also set a specific value of a specific type, represented, I guess, by these arrows here. Addition to that, a property will also contain a little name for what it will be visibly displayed as. Now, these properties are, again, just this, getters and setters, effectively, that are dynamic, an array just returned by the object. This would also theoretically allow a component to optionally return various properties, which could be a unique or an interesting thing for the future. However, this whole system here has nothing to, or doesn't at all tell us how we're going to make this not hard-coded. Because if a property is just a getter and a setter, how is that going to relate to displaying? Well, the few types of properties there is will directly reference one of a few different effective descriptions for displaying things in the toolbox that will be pre-initialized. Now, something that I guess is quite important is that for each of these various GUI descriptions for, say, strings, integers, and groups here, there will only ever be one instance of the specific thing that's going to get drawn here in this window. That is mostly down to how my UI system works, with needing references to the renderer, which need to be initialized at runtime. And so there's going to have to be a whole registration system for this, but effectively the way it's going to work is that when this page goes to draw, it'll check the currently selected component. If that component is configurable, it'll then get the list of properties. It'll then, from that property, get whatever component is supposed to render its property, and then display that on the page. Another thing that's very important is that you can also have multiple of the same property types, and they'll just kind of get displayed in here one after another. I don't know how many properties we're going to be able to have on a page. Looks like maybe 3 or 4. But in theory, we'll also have buttons to go to the next page if that is necessary. Another important thing to note is that the groups here, this is all hard-coded, but it's for every single stage component, so it's not really an issue. We're going to leave this alone. In addition to this system being implemented for the stage components, it's going to be an identical system, actually exactly the same, for the logic components. So it's just one system, and it's going to be relatively simple. Now, as you may have already guessed by this, I've already started to implement this system, and here's what I've got so far. I've got the abstract property class, which is the base of everything, is going to take in its type, or the specific type of each property. That way our getter and setter can be, getting and returning the specific thing. Here's, for example, with the string property. There is in the property defined a getter and a setter. Basically, the constructor for this just takes in a getter and a setter, which are expected to be lambda expressions, as well as a name, and then it just contains functions to get and set that. But notably, it also has this getConfigUI function here, which always returns the exact same reference to the string property configUI instance. Here is, for some reason, what the integer property has. I don't know how I got here from string property, but okay, I guess. And as you can see, this is relatively simple. This is just going to be the buttons to increase or decrease. Another important thing to note here is that I'm going to put it down to the actual component itself in its setter to validate whatever input is given for whether or not that's valid. Because maybe you want your number property to be limited to anything greater than 0. Well, I don't want to have to implement additional complex logic to potentially handle that when you could just do that yourself with your setter, because it doesn't just set the proper, it won't necessarily just actually set stuff. It could run any code theoretically you want when you change it. Okay, so it appears that I've hit a bit of a snag. I'm currently trying to work on the property rendering code here in the toolbox. Here's all the old code down here. Here's what I mean by hard code. It literally just checks the type of each of these to see what they are, and then does something based off that. But yeah, I'm for some reason getting this error, which makes little sense. Draw expects parameters like draw int capture number 4 of question mark. Which doesn't make much sense, and trying to run gives a slightly longer error, but that makes equally no sense. The method draw int capture number 4 of question mark in the property configUI capture number 4 of question mark is not applicable for arguments int property capture number 5 of question mark. I don't know what's going on here. I have an idea of what I might be able to do for a workaround, but this is annoying. Okay, so for a second there I thought I'd fixed it, because apparently the generics of the situation are just too complex, but I don't know what this is exactly meaning, or where this is meaning for that matter. So here, let me show you what I did, and I will probably have to fully rethink all this, because the generics are not cooperating with me. So basically what I did is I just put all of these functions here into the property itself. Also redefined the getUI method here to have a generic of the property of this same type. There's no way to just say whatever this thing is typed as, unfortunately. And this at first seemed to work because this isn't giving me an error, but running it still gives me this, and I don't know where this error is coming from because it's not telling me. Okay, I eventually got things sorted out here. It turns out the solution was even more generics. So now, instead of the property class just taking one generic for the type that it should be a property of, it now takes a second generic, which is a reference to itself, because generics, I guess. This is only specifically used for the configuration UI, or for the config UI classes, because they need more concrete generics than apparently what I was providing them. Also, apparently the types just didn't match. But yeah, we still have all of these functions down here in this class. So basically the toolbox will just call draw on the property, which will then pass itself to the actual config UI. Speaking of which, we go to the config UI. This is what it looks like now. It now also takes two components. The first one is now the type that the property is of. You do now actually have to pass that in. And the second one is, like before, the actual property config UI, but I've now changed it to this. So instead of it just extending a property of, you know, whatever type, it now has to be of this specific type and itself. That way it can return it, and that's basically all that. This here is all used for generic stuff outside this class. The T itself, or well, I guess T itself is actually used here in all these functions as normal, but it works now. It boots, and I haven't gotten to rendering yet, but that's what I'm going to do next. So, I guess the simplest way to test this would just go to ground. That is in itself a valid, but obviously we'll want to give it a property. So we'll say new integer property, but you know, the constructor that doesn't exist because we need a getter and a setter. Ooh, which one's first? Was it get or set? And now let's see if this works. We go click select, we select the ground, then moment of truth, we go to selection. There's nothing here. Okay, I figured out what the problem was. I was not in the draw function, I was in the mouse clicked function in the toolbox. Whoops. Not that that won't eventually be a thing I have to do anyway. Actually, basically after this. But, to start with here, obviously, these buttons aren't in the right place. So you can see here, the test, that's what we named our property here, and the 5. This here is being, you know, drawn by something else. We'll remove that later. But these buttons should be down here, not up here. So I guess step 1 is move these buttons down like they're supposed to be. Alright, that one was actually slightly embarrassing. I had actually done the part where I was like, okay, move these buttons down, but I hadn't told them to recalculate their entire positions. So yeah, now it's like this, although I do feel like these are a bit too low actually. I think they're in line with the 5. They should probably should be more in line with test, like midway through this. This would limit how long your property name can be. Alright, initial test on these buttons. It should just print into the console. Yes, 6, 15, 105, 4, -5, -95. Perfect. Buttons do exactly what I want them to. Now let's see what happens if I add a second property here. Alright, that is okay. Yeah, okay, there's enough space there between them. Definitely think the buttons should be moved up. I also actually think they shouldn't start this low. It should start more like up here. And then I'm gonna adjust the buttons, move everything up, and then I'm gonna see how many I could reasonably fit onto one page. And then we go, and then after that, we can start testing string properties. Okay, I actually haven't done this, actually finished doing it yet, but I just found this very useful thing that I didn't know I had installed on my computer. It's part of the Microsoft Power Toys screen ruler, and it will literally, just based off of colors, show you the pixel distance between stuff. But with this, I'm able to see, clearly, this is 335 pixels here, and this is 285 here. So they are not symmetrical. That will be changing. But I think I probably want to make this maybe 100 away from this wall max, and then I'll also have to do that same thing here, so just time to do a little bit of math. Okay, so yeah, 4, maybe 5, but I'm thinking 4 is probably the right number of these that we should have here. I mean, just look at that. 5 is right running into the set group there. And I don't think there's enough safe room around there for maybe other things. And then I have 8 here. It's obviously 6 is on screen, 7 isn't. So I think I'm going to cut it to 4. And we'll leave it for there now until we get strings working. Alright, moving on to strings. Now, I've put this text box in. It should theoretically work. Well, backspace isn't working. Why is backspace not working? It's like, I press backspace, and you can see that whenever it changes, it prints in the console here. So pressing backspace does cause it to print in the console there. To be fair, there are some quirks with this. Because of that thing I mentioned before where each text box, or each of these, or each time you have a property of some type, it always shares the exact same object. I mean, it's a miracle right now that we're able to keep typing. This text box is theoretically shared between every single instance of a string property on every object, on every component, which is a bit complicated to juggle. Admittedly, that was the most complicated thing when implementing this, and clearly it looks like something didn't work quite right, as backspace is not working, and neither are the arrow keys for that matter. Okay, so in terms of backspace not working, that was purely because I didn't actually call the key pressed method. I just called mouse clicked again. I forgot to change it. So that's why that's not working. So you can type stuff, you can backspace stuff. Theoretically, you can... Okay, you can't press and hold. I will change that. I don't think there's any other reason why pressing and holding would not be valid on the screen. You can paste stuff, theoretically. But arrow keys aren't working for some reason. And yeah, no idea why. So I guess step one is I'll turn key repeat on here, as it shouldn't matter that it's off, or shouldn't matter that it's on, because you're not doing any, you know, player movement sensitive to key inputs. Okay, so I figured it out. It turns out the reason why the cursor wasn't moving was because every time I set what the text is, I had also had it resetting the cursor to the end of the line, which kind of makes sense if you pre-fill it. You want to start typing at the end, but that's not necessarily what we want. We want to kind of remember where the cursor is, because we're continuously overwriting what the text actually is. Now, I believe that clicking should also work. Yes. I mean, it was never the most accurate thing in the world. Let's be real. But I made sure to also get that to work. But I believe... Oh, highlighting does work. Oh, what are the potential problems with highlighting? Bam! There are two text boxes. They're the same text box, but they're different. They have different text. I need to make it stop printing that eventually. Test E, and I come down here and go blah, 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 blah. And they are definitively different. Now, what happens if I highlight on this one? The highlight goes down. Now this one is longer. Ooh. 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 I have made it so that when you click, when you click on a text box, it'll remove whatever highlight currently exists. So if I do that, click on this one, the highlight just disappears instead of getting error. I also have no idea where that error actually occurred, because it didn't. The stack trace didn't actually point to anywhere in my code. It was just some nebulous processing thing that wasn't actually in my code, which was very confusing. But anyhow, now that I got multiple text boxes working, in theory at least, the grounds will have different things. So, or different, here, let's just move around what's where. Okay, so this is the original ground select. You can see it has these text values. Each ground currently has their own. So if I select the other one, okay, perfect. Right, that's right. Again, if we set the text content and the cursor is, actually not again. When I was having cursor setting things, I made it so that it'll automatically limit the cursor to the end of whatever the content is. So we go back here. Oh, the actual just string UI thing, that remembered. Okay, cool. But what happens now if I highlight here? See, okay, yeah, it crashed. But once again, see what I mean here about this weird error? This is just a process, or a Java proc? Processing mode Java runner? What even is this? Where is this? Alright, so I've implemented a little bit of a safety net system here. So if when you click on a different object, the bounds of the highlight, or actually more accurately, when the text is set, if the bounds of the highlight are outside the length, it'll just disable the highlighting when it sets the text. And you also have to be typing. So yeah, that I think is basically full functionality in the text box. I actually didn't expect it to be necessarily this easy. So now that we've got that done, more pages, I guess, is what I need to do next. So, you know. Alright, I've got buttons hooked up for the next page and previous page, and, looks Looks like I didn't quite think this through too much. Alright, I've got the interface fixed up here. As you can see, the pages navigate correctly, and there's no extra pages as well. That was a little bit of an oversight on my part there. Now that we've got this figured out, it's time to implement the rest of the property config-wise, because we do have more than just numbers and text that we got to be able to input. We also have to select variables, groups, and also sounds, I believe. All of those things are basically just variants of strings and ints, just with different interfaces on them, so they should be relatively easy to implement. Alright, I have finished implementing all the different property configurations that the game currently requires. I'll probably add a couple others for future usage after I'm done with all this, but for now I want to just get things working. So here we are. So obviously we have the text inputs. We've been talking about those for a little while now. But here, right in the middle of this text, which I haven't removed yet, there is property number 3. It currently says none because nothing is set for it, but this is the variable selection property. So you see if I start going through here, we have the B and then the number. That is how we signify the various variables here. You see we have up to 49 of these, but it's actually 50, but 0 index, and you see it goes to 49. Or maybe you can't see, I don't know, maybe YouTube compression makes this completely unreadable. Below that, it would appear we have the same thing, but this one's actually a bit different. This is the group selector, because first, I switch to something, and you can see, hey, there is actually a name there. Once again, that is what we got in the groups section here. This done. As you can see, we can go through all of them like that. Then on the next that's not the next page button. I made the system. On the big ol' next page button here, we then have the final one that is interesting. It looks once again similar, but this is the sound selection one, which is used on the sound boxes, and also actually in the for selecting sounds on the logic editor. But here you can see all the only sounds that I have in this level are bloop, bloop 2, and bloop 3, which come in a weird order, but that's just how the set or how the map regurgitates them out. But yeah, all these are working, and of course we have our int properties. That's all we've got in there. So now that I've gotten all these properties sorted out, it's time to actually start using and applying these to stuff instead of just, well, keeping them here on this page and this page alone. Alright, I've made some progress on starting to move things over to the new system. To start with, the sign has been updated with how it works in here. So first of all, we have this property, which is kind of a meta property, but still configurable here, which is the number of lines, because these text boxes don't really support multi-line editing. Stuff tends to get a bit weird when you do that. So I just decided, instead of having to either create a custom multi-line text box or something else, let's just make it so you can set the number of lines that the text box has, specifically up to a max of 8. And then each line is its own text box. As you can see here, they're all labeled with their appropriate line number. And, where is this key press stuff happening? I need to change that. It's not supposed to be doing that still. But as you can see, there's more text here, and if I were to go to, say, the very last one, pretend that says something useful. See, it's down at the bottom here. I decided 8 was the perfect amount because when you go to 9, it starts to overlap the press E at the bottom. So I think this is good. The next thing that I converted over to the system was the sound box, which now, instead of using the old system for selecting sound, uses the new sound property type here to be able to select from the sounds in the level. And of course, we still just have those same 3 sounds from earlier. And finally, in the logic editor, which is also a part of this change if you don't remember, the read and set variable blocks have been updated to use this new system as well for setting their current variable. Clearly my padding's a bit inaccurate for read, but I'll adjust that. And also, of course, setting variables is exactly the same. Now on to the next thing, which I don't remember what it is. Alright then, everything that can or that was configurable before has now been converted over to the modular system, and I have completely removed the old hard-coded system. So it's all with this modular system now. So we got delay here. It works as you'd expected. Sound, a logic component. I am in a logic board right now. We got this set X offset, Y offset, and of course Z offset, as well as visibility, but we do have those. So here's X offset, You can see we have the ability. This is the only thing that previously had multiple different things you could configure. So you have both the group and the offset set here. This is the Y offset and Z offset. You can't tell a difference. Here, let's change them so you can tell that I'm actually, you know, clicking on different ones. They update just the same on the other window. Visibility wise, we just have the group listed there. And yeah, now that everything has been switched over to the new system, there's just one more thing I gotta do to completely wipe remnants of the old system. Alright, all of the references to get data, set data, all that have been deleted. Well, I deleted the references earlier. All the implementations have also been deleted. That's all gone now. The game should just launch, but someone's still using get data. Hang on a second. Oh, this is how I'm displaying the sign's contents. Alright then, that was a relatively simple change. Just added a method specifically to the sign to get its content, and we just check specifically for the type here, as this thing here says. We do need to make this modular. I'm just not sure how I will make this modular in the future, because I did not think about this at all during this modularization system. Quite frankly, I forgot how this worked. But now that is that, the game should launch, right? Everything works. And I also think that that is where I am going to be ending off this video. It's been a very productive video, I'd say. We got new modular system installed, always like that. But yeah, if you liked the game and want to check out the current version that doesn't have this new system that I just put in, that will be linked in the description. You know, leave a comment telling me what you thought of this, subscribe, all that sort of stuff, and I'll see you next time.